Well, g'day friends, welcome back to Cities Skylines 2. If you missed the last episode, we've just started up our brand new series where we are building up our very own version of New York City and all the places around it. And we're off to a cracking start. I mean, can't you just see the resemblance? We've got Brooklyn Bridge down here and Manhattan over here, of course, with the Chrysler Building and Central Park and Times Square somewhere down here and yeah, it's really not looking that great. So today's goal is to make this place feel and look a whole lot more realistic, the sort of place where you'd like to live. Now, I have to admit, this area down here won't be New York City. This will in fact be more inspired by Jersey City. I reckon Manhattan will be around here. We'll have Union City and maybe Brooklyn be on the other side. I don't know, we're still trying to figure that out, including the name. I haven't named it yet. Our next milestone is Tiny Town, which is perfect. I want that mixed zoning because I think that'll be perfect for our downtown, which is something that I want to work on in today's episode. And I also think that I may have found our solution to our water problem. That was causing a lot of grief in the last episode because I don't want it trickling down the mountain. I want this to be at this level, and it most certainly is not. But I think I might have found a solution. So because this is going to be downtown, I need to figure out what the grid layout's going to look like, and I'm thinking something like this. I just got to figure out what the transition into all of this is going to look like, because at the moment, that's not it, son. So I'm going for a pretty standard grid layout with this alleyway that's going to be breaking up the grid a little bit more, with most of the houses and buildings around here going to be zoned onto the main roads. And then I'll probably have a couple of apartments that are zoned onto these alleys, but I'm still figuring out what that's going to look like. But something that I definitely need to change is that if this is going to be downtown, single family housing, I don't think so, young man. These are pretty large blocks, which I think are going to work pretty well when we have a downtown and a couple of higher rises around here. But for now, it looks a little bit odd, but I will go through and just upgrade a couple of these roads, like this one, and I'll leave that one for a little while. But I actually really like the way that this one's laid out. I think by having these two commercial buildings right here with the parking on either side, I think kind of works really well. And they've also got a bit of symmetry going on with these row houses and some of these larger medium density apartment blocks, which I really like. So I kind of don't want to touch that. It's one of the more detailed sections of the city. I mean, this whole block, these two blocks are like the best parts. So you know what? Maybe we don't touch these. And I think I'll add in an extra alleyway just so I can give a bit more of a connection between these roads. And, in Cities Skylines 1, I would connect it up to the laneway that's already here. But because we've actually got a medium road there, I don't really want to do that because it doesn't really give us much space to zone. So, because we're in Cities Skylines 2, you can still kind of connect them. Check this out. I mean, it's wonky, it's a bit shonky, but kind of love it. And then when it comes to zoning, we do need a bit of commercial, so I'm going to make all of this area where it is right on the main road. I'm going to make this, get out of here. I'm going to make this commercial. Don't you hate that? Don't zone on that. See, this is what I really dislike about zoning in this game. In Cities Skylines 1, we had the zone toggler, which meant that we could choose which roads the buildings would zone on. And it feels like a bit of a step backwards that we don't have that in this. All right, so this is what we're going to have to do. I'm going to zone like that, and then you guys will zone up. And now we'll do this. See, I feel like that's a step backwards. That's not great. And of course, we don't have any demand for anything other than single family housing here, so fabulous. But I will point out another complaint that I have about zoning, and I'll use the low density housing just to show you an example, but let's say I want to zone on this alleyway, so I'm just going to go like that. No houses. No houses. And there they are. So obviously this grid is attached to this road. And that's really annoying. I mean, it's almost like it just excludes a couple of roads. I guess maybe it's on a weird angle or something, is something not quite aligned, but I don't know, it just makes zoning a little bit tricky. All right. So downtown is looking a little bit more downtowny, which is good. It's a bit of a concrete jungle. It's still a work in progress, but it's on its way for sure. I've got a couple of plans. But I do like that we do have a bit of commercial and some office buildings in the middle down here, surrounded by some higher apartment blocks, which are just starting to sprout up a little bit more. But yeah, it's a work in progress. It's a bit hard though in Cities Skylines 2 to fill areas like this. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't build blocks that aren't the conventional, very grid-like pattern that I think Cities Skylines 2 really wants you to play in, because this doesn't look very nice. And unfortunately, filling it with trees isn't really much of an option either. I mean, if I got the London pine, which doesn't take up a huge amount of space, and just kind of see what we fill up here, it's really not a huge amount. If I had mods and assets, I'd just chuck in a little bit of a concrete block there, a couple of trees along the side here. You know, just, oh man, a couple of assets would really go a long way. But you know what? I'm gonna hold out for it. That's why I'm kind of keeping it like this. If I was gonna keep on playing vanilla, I'd probably stick with something like this. But because we're gonna be adding some assets a little later on, custom ones that is, we're gonna keep this grid layout. I like it. But I think before I continue just to zone and build and detail and do all the things that don't really equate to any money, I should probably do something about the money, because we're losing it. So I'm gonna go through and I'm just gonna start taxing these guys. You can go through and tailor this a little bit more, but I think I'm just gonna push all that up. But you can tax these guys quite a lot. They're suckers for this. But I think if we're gonna tax them a bit more, we should probably see what their happiness is like. Yeah, they're happy. They're happy people. A lack of entertainment though is a bit of a problem. High taxes. Sorry about that. But a lack of entertainment, I can fix that. So a couple of parks wouldn't go astray. I'm going to add in maybe even a basketball court. I really want to add it somewhere around here. I'm trying to go for spaces that are already a little bit awkward. You know, something like this, which is already a really nice, perfect grid, and it's zoned out really beautifully. I don't think I really want to touch that too much. Whereas areas that it's, you know, not quite as perfect, I think that's the perfect spots to place things down manually. In fact, that one that I was talking about, that block that was looking a bit ugly, let's just de-zone that, because it's not like we don't need any commercial buildings at the moment. Actually, let's just tailor this a little bit more. How about we do a bit of commercial on that corner and on this corner? Actually, no, just there. Commercial. But then behind it can be a little park. And that pathway actually fits in really nicely behind that commercial. Ugh. Alright, well that's 5 minutes of my life I'll never get back. I did get into a bit of a rhythm, like literally a rhythm. When you're placing these things down, you kind of get into this boom chip, boom chip, boom chip, boom chip, but you know, like, you know, that's pretty rhythmic. I kind of like it. Do I like this? No. But I'll place another couple of smaller parks just around suburbia, and then I will turn our fake park. And I say fake park because at the moment it's just a couple of paths pretending to be a park that's actually not adding any land value at all. I think I'll move along our crematorium, and I feel like we can do a little bit better down here. Alright, we're getting somewhere with this park. There's still a little bit more work to do, but I just wanted to show you that when you are dragging out your paths and creating these kind of like curvy pathways throughout these parks, I think it's really easy to fall into the habit of creating these really big bends, because I guess when you look at the rest of the city, this is, you know, you kind of go, alright, that makes a bit of sense. Whereas I think that when you look at the scale of these people and when you think about when you are walking through parks, you do actually have bends that are probably a little bit more like this, you know, a bit bendier. So I think that's totally fine, and I think that actually looks probably a little bit more to scale. You know, bends like this, a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter, I think they work really well. We've gone through and added in some of these parks. Oh, hello. But we are adding in these parks, which are now adding in land value and actually making this park function like a park. But I tell you what, I really hate the difference between this grass and this grass. That's a bit of a problem. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to drag a pathway right next to it. It's not a great solution, but it's a solution. But I have been going through adding in the most basic of details, pretty much just leaving open spaces and going through with some of the smaller trees, some of the smaller bushes, and kind of just filling some of these spaces that are a little bit bushier and a little bit more wild, and kind of creating these divides between these green spaces so you can kind of hang out in one area and play footy in the next area. Started to do that with this area, but I reckon that instead we could probably do some of these a little curvy path, kind of like that. There you go. There's no doubt we would definitely see some, I mean, if these guys were cutting across the grass here, you'd definitely see some of those worn out areas where people are trying to cut across the grass. So there you go, that should solve that. But I think just going through and adding in a couple of extra bushes down below some of these trees, I think just adds just a smidge of detail, which I think is something really necessary in areas like this. So I'm gonna continue to do that in this park and we'll see how that looks. All right, I'm calling it. That is it for this park, at least for now. This is a sort of place that I reckon when we start getting custom mods and assets being introduced, we're gonna come back to this in like a couple of months and go, oh boy, that looks pretty bad. But for now, I think it's all right. Going through and just adding in some small pockets of trees and even going through, I mean, this is meant to be a flower bed. Man, it does not look like that. It's just like this bronze mess, but we'll just come back and see how this looks, particularly when we start seeing some growth, which I think we'll start to see in this episode, because we're gonna fly through a couple of months because we have now unlocked. We can, of course, get into the mixed housing, which is great. We're gonna be adding that into our downtown zone, which we're gonna do that shortly. And with our new milestone reached, we now have 7 more tiles to buy up, which I believe I'm about to use because I would like to solve our water problem. Basically, if you missed the last episode, see how this is way higher up than down here. I want this to be at the same level as this because I want this to be a swamp. A big old lake stretching through in a swampy area, but at the moment it's like a raging river rapid, and I don't want that. And it's because there's a water source up here and it's coming all the way down the mountain. I think that I can solve that. Alright, it's a total mess, which is why I've saved it. I'm going to press play, we'll speed him up, and let's just see what the water does. But what I think is going to happen is that this river is going to flow into this one, and then this body of water will just be influenced by the sea level. So gradually, we should see a bit of a drop, quite a big drop, because there is in fact a really big difference between this and down here. So let's just wait a little bit. We'll see how much of a difference it makes. I'm gonna put a little bush, just there, just to get a bit of an idea of how much it drops. Please drop. I mean, at some point I would like this whole stream, this whole river to kind of stretch all the way through the mountainside. And maybe even this, or maybe even that body of water, whatever that water source is doing, maybe it kind of goes through this way. I don't know. This is episode 2 and I've already made a pretty big mess, so expect a whole lot more. Wow, check that out. That has already made a really big change in the height difference. So I think we're gonna see some pretty big differences with the terrain as we progress through this episode, and I reckon it won't be until the very end of it that we'll actually see the true form of this river and how it's gonna snake around here. Alright, so now the game looks like this. So I've just restarted my computer and this is what I was greeted with. I swear this is much darker than before, right? It'll be more obvious in the video than what I'm looking at right now, but I'm pretty sure this is much darker, and now we have clouds. So there's that, but I actually think I prefer this. And I guess I just answered my own question, didn't I? Why is this game a little bit darker now? It's most probably the giant cloud that's over the city. It just happened a lot quicker than I expected, and I guess they are still ironing out a lot of the bugs and graphical quirks of the game, so I will give them that. It's going to take a little bit of time, and I think even though there are a lot of things that still need to be worked on with the game. You can already see some of the improvements that they've made, and I am really looking forward to seeing how much the game is going to change. I reckon give it a couple of months and this is going to be a lot different to what we have right now. I'm very much in the boat of I'm having a lot of fun, I'm really enjoying it, but there are a lot of things that I am just holding out for and really wanted to see, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what ends up happening with the game down the track. The current version, I have to admit, does feel a little bit incomplete. So that's why I'm holding out. I reckon it's going to be pretty good in a couple of months. In game though, what I'm working on is this little island which is sitting just north of the city that we've been working on. This is going to be of course inspired by Stratton Island. It's going to be a while until we properly start working on this place and figuring out the layout and what it's going to look like and what it's going to really represent, and you know, trying to condense what is so much land and so much features of this place into what is going to be a much small and scaled down version of it. So I have to try and figure that out. I also need to figure out what sort of name I'm going to give it to, so if you've got any ideas, hit me up. At the moment, it's just a little island that's sitting north of our city. We'll have to figure out what that's going to look like a little bit later on. Terraforming on this map has got to be one of the biggest challenges that I am encountering so far, just because there are some really drastic and massive changes within the landscape, and figuring out how I can actually realistically put some sort of city on this place is actually proving to be really challenging. Are you guys also experiencing these challenges when building your first city? Because this is really hard. Working on these maps, the terraforming is just all over the place, and to try and build something that is somewhat realistic and also trying to work with the scale of the buildings, which I find really different to Cities Skylines 1. I don't know, I'm finding this really hard. Not to mention that because the trees aren't fully grown, I'm also trying to figure out what they're going to look like when they are grown up, and then the scale of those trees to the mountains and the hills and the landscape. And I don't want to make this place completely flat, but I do want to make it so that I can build something on here without making it on a giant mountain or building it around unrealistic water sources and trying to figure out where the sea level is. All this sort of stuff is just kind of hard, but also I do sort of like it because it does mean that you have to try and be creative with the way that you do build your cities and try and solve these problems, which I have to admit I do enjoy doing. And I might even do next episode, we just focus on terraforming and expanding our little town that is turning into a city over some a little bit more tricky terrain and trying to figure out how that's going to look and even creating some features. Because that's the other thing, it's not just that we're working with terrain that is kind of all over the place, but it is sort of featureless. Apart from the mountains that sit on the very far edges of the map, and yeah, we've got the bay, we've got the river, but apart from that, it doesn't really have any features. And I guess that's kind of good because it does leave it open so that you can go through and create your own landscape features and environmental features. But if you are a first time player, I think that's going to make things a little bit more challenging. But anyway, I'm rambling, and look, it's wintertime. When it's winter in this game, I usually go through and do a little bit of zoning. Because these buildings look pretty nice during wintertime, I figure this is probably a good time to do these sort of things. I want to focus on the downtown, adding in some of that mixed zoning and just tailoring some of these areas just to really show that there's a bit more detail down here and just figure out what sort of things that I can do with the new zoning tools. And I am holding out for a couple of signature buildings and to really figure out what these areas are going to look like when we can add in some extra bits and pieces, not just zoning, but then also some taller buildings, getting into some of the high-rise apartments and even some higher density office blocks. But for now, this is looking alright. But as much as I work on the city, there is just still one thing that is really bothering me. And you know what it is? It's this water source. Yeah, this thing is still really annoying me. I just want this out of the way, I don't want to think about it, so I decided to just drag it out in a different direction, in a place that I think will cause less effect to the city and will hopefully give us more space to expand out the landscaping and terraforming and figure out where this whole area is going to progress into. It's still a bit of a band-aid on a much bigger problem, but this is fine for now. The good news is that the water level around our industry and all around this river has dramatically dropped, which means that it's at a much more realistic level, and it means that when we do start building around this waterfront and building out some wharves and some docks and just a more realistic waterfront, this is going to be just a much better place. But with how long it takes for water to change within Cities Skylines 2, I'm just going to wait a little bit longer before we start making some big changes around here. At least before we put any detail. It did mean though, I could go through and remove some of the industry so I could refigure out where some of these roads were going to sit, because now that the landscape around here was going to change to a much more realistic level, it meant that I could go through and add in some different roads and really figure out what this is going to look like. Quite often, around old industry, you'll also have historical neighborhoods that were built around the same time that were for the workers of that industry, and they are typically much smaller houses. I'm going for row houses around here that are a little bit smaller, so I'm mostly going for 2x1 and sometimes 3x1. This is a neighborhood that I'm going to continue to play with, especially when we start getting some custom mods and assets, because I really think that we can make this place look really special, because at the moment, I'm trying to get these buildings to zone and build onto particular roads and alleyways, but as you can see, they're being pretty difficult. So I will come back and tailor this place. And at the moment, I'm not really basing it off anywhere, but if you have an idea of where I should be basing this off, let me know. That also goes for this neighborhood that I'm about to build up on this ridge. I'm only going to put in the bare bones as we are going to be expanding upon these places later on in these episodes. But for now, I just wanted to figure out whereabouts it was going to fit within the rest of the city and where it fits on this island. And yeah, this is going to be an island. I actually think that a lot of the cities and places that we can be building within this series are going to be technically islands, because they're going to be surrounded by all sorts of different water sources, and I reckon we're probably going to be creating a fair few islands just to really separate these different cities and really identify them as different places within the map. And that is pretty key to me, making it so that we're not just building one giant city that feels like just an expansion of the one place, but instead really making it so that each area that we end up building feels very unique and different. And I think what really helps to drive that idea is to separate these places either with highways or main roads, or natural features like a lake or a stream or a mountain, or to have something that no other place on the map features. I think a good example of that is this bridge that kind of accidentally happened when I was dragging out these roads. I just wanted to make an intersection here that was going to be a little bit more complicated, but for some reason, and I guess the reason being that there was a terrain difference, we ended up creating a bridge, and I really liked that. So I decided just to try and make that again, but make it a little bit more detailed and be a bit of a feature as you drive into this neighborhood or drive out of it. And I think that this is going to be an area that I think is going to be a true focal point for when you are traversing between this neighborhood and the rest of the city. Also felt like a good opportunity to build something up on this ridge that I felt like we needed to have another feature that really was prominent within the city and kind of gave this neighborhood that's going to sit up here a bit more of an identity. So it felt like maybe some sort of college, because this is a nice old building which I think would have probably been built much earlier on in the development of the city, and maybe even been something of a landmark or historical significance, or just a building that is just heritage listed and will always be here with the city, just perched up on this cliffside. Even when we start getting larger buildings in the city, you know, some higher office buildings and some apartment blocks, this building will always sit up on this cliff. And I think that's kind of interesting, especially when we start expanding upon this series, and this will always sit up here. And I do kind of wish that we had more buildings like this unlocked earlier on, because if you are building a city and expanding from an early start, you know, you do want these historical buildings to be here from the very beginning. So to unlock more historical buildings as you progress, and then you place them down later on next to a highway or whatever, kind of feels like these historical buildings need to be placed down from the very beginning, and then you add in those highways, those more modern buildings, and those parts of the urban environment that are introduced into these cities when they are cities, when they're much larger. But hey, that's just me. I think that's a real rabbit hole we can go down. And I'm sure when we start getting some custom assets, then we'll be able to do things like that. Even some of those packs that were announced just not long ago, pretty excited about that. There's some New York East Coast ones, so I'm all on board for that. But anyway, that's it for the time lapse. Let's jump back into this game. So as you can see, quite a lot of time has passed and the city is starting to look a little bit more established, a little bit more colourful with all these trees surrounding it and starting to get a little bit more grown up. Now, before I give you the city tour, because there's a couple of things have changed off camera, not just the trees, but a couple of extra things. I have read your comments and we are now going to name our series, our city, not just this city, but the whole of everything. Well, sticking with the New York theme, taking inspiration from the last name, New Dollarton, I'm gonna call this place New Teeland. Nah, I'm just joking. That's too similar to those islands that's near Australia. Alright, let's be real. The real name for this series and this city is going to be Two Dollarton. I mean, it was the most voted upon name that you guys suggested, from New Dollarton to Two Dollarton. Yeah, it's great. So thanks for all those name suggestions, and please keep names coming because it's not just one name for the city. I plan to name a lot of things. Speaking of which, this city down here is taking inspiration from Jersey City and this whole island. It's become an island. This is going to be taking inspiration from New Jersey. So keeping that theme, what is this city going to be called? So I've just dragged out 4 districts because as I build my cities, I like to imagine, rather than just expanding from one area, I try to kind of find the foundational space that the city is kind of founded on, but then I try and build from neighborhoods. So as you can see, some are a bit more pronounced than others, but we've obviously got the main town center here. This is going to be where the downtown is going to sit. And then Sterling Springs, which is not going to be kept like that. You can start to see how I'm forming what is going to be a bit of a center of this neighborhood where we're going to have a bit of commercial, and then the housing and the industry is going to be kind of all part of that as well. And then Hamilton End, again, not going to keep it that. We've got a lot of commercial up here, which I've just zoned out just so we can fill that demand. But this is another neighborhood that we are going to expand from. And then Florence Crossing. I'll probably build some sort of commercial district here, some sort of town center, neighborhood center, but just shows how the city has expanded and the neighborhoods have all kind of merged together to form one giant city. But I hope you can see that these places are a little bit more pronounced. They're not just one giant city that has just grown from one center. It is a combination of neighborhoods that have expanded over time. And then we've got our industrial dumping zone, which I'm not exactly proud of, but it's doing the trick. But I am really loving some areas of this little downtown that is starting to establish here, particularly this little block, which is just working out really lovely. I kind of wish they were all the same type of brick color, but you know what? I'm not going to go ahead and demolish them all. I think we're just going to keep it like that. But I'm really loving what's going on, especially the mix between these older brick buildings and some more modern. And again, that mix of the old and the new. And this little alleyway that sits in there, yeah, some really nice little pockets. Loving it. You know, places like this, I think are starting to turn out really nice. Trying to mix in a little bit of commercial and some apartment buildings, and then some row houses as well. I might go through and just remove a couple of trees just so we can kind of see a little bit more of the details down here. Maybe like these. Might even make this completely like that. Yeah, I think that's really nice. And look at the density down here. I mean, this is such a full area full of trees. That's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. And back on names, someone did mention New Dimesburg for the place that we are building down here. I'm gonna be honest, I kind of love it. I think I might call it New Dimesburg, but that might be the last dollar pun. Maybe no more puns after that. In terms of the management of the city, I've been investing in education quite a bit by adding in this elementary school, which is almost full, which is lovely to see. In fact, let's just expand like that. Beautiful. And then I built the college, which not a huge amount of people were attending, of course, because we didn't have the high school. So now with the 3, we are educating our Sims quite a lot. And then by the time we unlock our university, I think we should be pretty sweet. But I do recommend investing in some education because it does take a while to educate these guys, and then it will impact your office spaces And then by the time you unlock your high density offices, which I know everyone wants to unlock, you want that tall skyline, well, you want to have your citizens nice and educated before that. So highly recommend that, as well as your specialized industry too. So just something to think about. In terms of our finances, we are apparently losing money, even though I am also making money. I don't know how that's working. I know I am unlocking cash as I am working through the milestones, but it does sort of seem a little bit odd. I feel like I am seeing more of an increase in finances than I am seeing a decrease, even though it also doesn't look like it. So I think something's going on with the economics with this game, as well as the production chain. I think there's a couple of bugs, which does also mean that the industry isn't really funneling into the city very well and into our commercial districts, which is a bit of a problem. It's also a bit disappointing because I love that connection between our production chain and our commercial districts. So I don't know, we'll see what happens with that. I'm sure they're going to fix that with a couple of updates in the future. Alright, before I finish this episode, there's one more big change that I want to make, and it's a biggie. So I'm obviously trying to make some wharves here and some piers, and it's going to be a real challenge. But this is just a bit of a let's see how this looks type of deal, because I don't really want to go and dive right into making these keys at the moment, because making keys in this game is really challenging. Because if you have a look at this, I'm going to turn off snapping. If I was to try and make a key along the water, it doesn't really work. There is a little sneaky way of doing it, but it's going to be hard. So what I'm doing here is I want to make sure that when I do build these keys, when I do build these wharves, I'm going to be totally happy with where they sit and how they look. So this is me just having a bit of a play with where some of these are going to go. Even that doesn't like it. It's very frustrating. Now I can go through and just drag a couple of smaller roads just so I can get a bit of an idea of where some of these can potentially sit later on. And it'd be fun to try and figure out what the purpose of these wharves are going to be. I think some dedicated to parks, some could have some apartments, some very flash apartments on them. In fact, let's just have a little go at one of these parks. So just an experiment, just to see how things are going to take shape on the waterfront. And some things I like, some things I don't really like that much. For instance, I don't love how high up this is now. You know, when I originally dragged out roads to test the height in the first episode, this was like up to here, but I guess because I've shifted where that water source is trickling down the mountain, I guess it's really affected the way that the water sits along this area, which is a bit of a shame. It means that when I do drag this out for real, I'll probably drop the land a fair bit, probably about half when it comes to the water's edge. So I'll probably do that because this is way too high up. Or I might just think about another way of maybe just making it so that it's not so prominent like that. But yeah, I don't love that. But something that I do like, I've used two alleyways here to create this area. The trees aren't straight, but don't look at that. Just forget I even mentioned it. But I kind of like that. So I'll probably do something similar. And I also like the positioning of this soccer field. So I'll probably do something like that as well. And then even this is all right. But I don't know, still trying to figure that out. What do you reckon? I mean, we're going to have some wharves here and some keys and get a bit of an idea of how that's going to look. And, you know, before it was parks and before it was office spaces and commercial, it was industry. So obviously we're going to have some old rail lines coming out here too. And also thinking about realistically, how did this industry function? And how did it get pushed out and whereabouts it's been pushed out to? But I do love the way that it's framing the city. I think that this is a great way just to make the place feel a little bit more realistic but also just kind of feel a little bit more complete, give you a bit of an idea of where things are going. But what do you reckon? Let me know in the comment section if you have any suggestions for the next episode and where to next, then please hit me up. And I'm super keen to see how far we end up taking this city. But guys, thank you all so much for watching today's episode. I did struggle with this one, I have to be honest. Getting this off the ground, this city off the ground, is a bit of a challenge, especially when it doesn't look like a true place. It kind of looks like a mix between a city and a town, and then also a bit of a work in progress. But I feel like we're at a stage where it's starting to get a little bit more established, and I'm excited to see the next stages. What do you reckon? I'm always keen to hear from you guys, and let me know if you are also having struggles with this game and want me to dive any deeper into any sort of tutorials or things that I'm doing, or just talk about the builds that I'm doing a little bit more in detail. Just let me know. A big shout out to some of the newest members over on Patreon supporting the channel: Kelvin, Julian McGowan, Lockjiang, Fuzzred, Dexter Bats, and Jonathan Rupel. Cheers, legends. I'll catch you all on the next one. Bye.